Japanese expansion. The Meiji Restoration. The Restoration kicked off with a reformation of sorts. Japanese leaders at the time were worried about the increasing growth of foreign encroachment and the thought of opening Japan to the other side of the world, and feeling economic pressure like China did. They thought of the West as having constitutionalism for national unity, industrialization for material strength, and a well-trained military for national security, adopting a slogan, "Enrich the country, strengthen the army." The Meiji Restoration of 1868 marked a period of modernization, militarization, and industrialization. During this period, the government was still heavily dependent on agriculture, but started to lean more towards industrialization, setting the stage for imperial ambitions. Japan pursued an aggressive policy of territorial expansion in Asia, seeking to establish a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. This expansionist agenda led to conflicts with other nations, including the United States. Japan's expansionist policies were rooted in the desire for resources, particularly oil, rubber, steel, and iron ore to sustain its growing industrial and military needs. The concept of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, propagated by Japanese leaders, aimed to establish a self-sufficient group of Asian nations under Japanese supreme leadership. This expansionist ideology fueled Japan's aggressive actions in Asia during the 1930s. The Manchurian Incident. Japan invaded Manchuria, a region in northeastern China, leading to international condemnation. This marked the beginning of Japan's military invasion in Asia. The invasion of Manchuria began with the Mukdong Incident in 1931, where Japanese military personnel staged an attack on a Japanese-owned railway and used it as a pretext to seize control of the region. Second Chiho War. Japanese invasion of China escalated into a full-scale war. The conflict drew the attention of the international community, and the United States, among other nations, condemned Japanese actions. The conflict escalated with the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937. Japan occupied Manchuria, which is now northeast China. On this new land, Japan began to do what they feared the West would do to them back in the beginning. They began to slowly encroach on Chinese land. In response to this violation, Chinese men and women began to start anti-Japanese movements. Seeing the impending danger, Chinese communists and nationalists alike decided to fight before their land was taken from them. The sheer brutality of the war, marked by events like the Nanking Massacre, heightened international tensions and drew condemnation. Tripartite Pact. This marks the official start of the Japanese entrance into World War II. The Tripartite Pact, signed on September 27, 1940, solidified Japanese alliance with Germany and Italy. The pact aimed at mutual defense and coordination of the military efforts, expanding the Axis powers beyond Europe. This pact solidified Japanese alignment with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. U.S. economic sanctions. In response to Japanese aggression in China, the United States imposed economic sanctions, which are restrictions put on trade for certain groups of people, such as corporate entities, individuals, or even entire governments in this case. The sanctions included an embargo on oil and steel exports to Japan. These sanctions aimed to pressure Japan to withdraw from its conquests in Asia. Negotiations and diplomacy. In an attempt to resolve tensions, the U.S. engaged in a diplomatic negotiation with Japan. The U.S. presented a set of demands known as the Whole Notes, which included Japan's withdrawal from China. However, diplomatic efforts failed to reach a satisfactory resolution.
December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. On this fateful morning, the tranquility of Pearl Harbor was shattered by a surprise attack that would change the course of history. The morning of that day, the first wave of Japanese fighter planes descended upon the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The peaceful Sunday morning was torn apart as bombs rained down on the unsuspecting ships and facilities. The sound of explosions filled the air as ships were engulfed in flame. The attack was relentless, catching the American forces completely off guard. As news of the attack spread, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the nation, declaring December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. The United States was thrust into World War II, making a pivotal moment in global history. The aftermath of the attack was devastating. The number of deaths were in the thousands, with many more injured. The destruction of the U.S. Pacific Fleet dealt a severe blow to America's military capabilities. The images of ships engulfed in flames, the wreckage, and the loss of life left a huge mark on the American public. The attack on Pearl Harbor rallied the nation to unite against the forces of tyranny and aggression. Today, the USS Arizona Memorial stands as a solemn tribute to the lives lost in the attack of Pearl Harbor. It serves as a reminder of the sacrifices made and the resilience of the American spirit in the face of adversity. The bomb of Pearl Harbor was a turning point in history, one that shaped the course of World War II and the future of the United States. It was a day of infamy, but also a day that ignited the flame of patriotism and unity across the nation. Join us as we remember the heroes and honor the legacy of those who experienced the events of December 7th, 1941, a day that forever changed the world.
After hearing all of that information, some might be wondering, well, how exactly is that a turning point in American history? There are a variety of answers to this question, but for the main answers would be the entering of World War II, the creation of the nuclear bomb, and the economical impacts that the war had on the United States of America. To start off with entering the war, after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor as a surprise attack to weaken the naval strength of America. This then gave America justifiable reasoning to join World War II and fight against Japan and the Axis power. So, United States took part in World War II from 1941 to 1945. For the sake of the documentary, we'll skip to the relevant part. Now that that's done, we will start off with the Battle of Okinawa. This was the battle ultimately leading up to the end of the war and in the bombing of Japan. This battle on the island of Okinawa started on April 1st and ended in June 1945. The Japanese main tactics to fend off against American naval was their signature kamikaze, and they launched over 1,000 of these. This is the action where they are suicide bombing themselves within planes to take out ships. This battle strategy has the American casualty up to 49,000, took over 12,000 lives, and sunk over 20 naval ships. Seeing how many lives were lost during this encounter and how ruthless the Japanese were, President Truman didn't want to invade Japan due to the possible amount of casualties that would have been caused from the invasion. Noting this would inevitably be one of the major factors in the use of the atomic bomb. On May 7th, Germany surrendered, and this effectively ended most of the fighting in Europe. But of course, Japan wasn't going to surrender that easily. The United States was still fighting Japan, and they clearly weren't going to surrender. A month after Okinawa ended, and on July 16th, Americans finally completed the first successful test and detonation of the atomic bomb. After another month, it was finally time. The U.S. waited long enough, and approximately 8:15, an atomic bomb given the name Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Big Boy was dropped on Nagasaki. After the bombs were dropped and successfully detonated, this marked the end of World War II and Japan surrendered. Many people in America saw dropping the bombs to be very unethical and really wasn't called for. This caused a bit of outrage in America. The creation of the nuclear bomb was a major turning point, and it can be all directly connected back to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Without Japan attacking us and bringing us into the war, then the ultimate butterfly effect wouldn't have happened. 1. The winning of the war. It is hard to say that the Allied forces would have won the war without U.S. troops and U.S. fighting Japan. 2. The creation of the nuclear bomb. From a perspective, this was made from direct correlation to Japan attacking us in the beginning at Pearl Harbor. 3. The Cold War. Eventually, after creating the bomb, the Soviet Union was successful in creating their own. Both of them having the accessibility to the atomic bomb put them in a stalemate because they didn't want to destroy the world. The effects of the Cold War vary, such as peacetime and the space race. For peacetime, we can logically say, since most countries didn't want the atomic bomb to go off and destroy the world, this has resulted in the longest peacetime that we've had. And for the space race, it was directly to combat Russia and to beat them in technological advancements from going to space and others. All of these effects can be stated to have come from one major cause. Although this is not an objective fact, it can be logically inferred, and this is why Pearl Harbor was one of the, if not the biggest turning point in American history and the world.